I don't care where you live in the US or maybe even globally, birds can be a problem, right? Um, and the thing is I didn't realize it was a problem. I'm not sure if you knew that was a problem, Gail, but gosh, I didn't know it was a problem until a dairy farmer told me. He said, "I'm losing $200,000 a year, Amber, from birds."
Oh, wow.
And there's other things that we haven't been able to really measure yet. Um, we know from our research we're actually looking at about $55 per cow per day in losses.
Well, welcome everybody to this episode of the Dairy Podcast Show. I'm your host for today, Gail Carpenter with Iowa State University. I'm joined by Amber Adams Progar. And am I saying your last name right? I usually have to double check. Is it Progar?
It is. It's spot on.
Okay.
Good job.
All right. All right. Fantastic. So Amber's joining us today from Florida. It's a little bit warmer there than here, probably up in the Midwest, but we're glad to be chatting today. Amber is currently an associate professor at Washington State University. She's a dairy management specialist. And she looks like you spent some time undergrad at River Falls, University of Wisconsin, River Falls, master's in animal biology at Oklahoma State, and PhD at Texas A&M. And I know you specialize a lot in animal behavior, dairy cattle behavior and welfare, but I think you took like a little bit of a different educational route than some of our behavior experts have. So do you want to talk about that a little bit and how you got in the position that you're in now?
Oh yeah, I sure did, right? So it's funny. I grew up on a dairy farm. I'm a
Mhm.
Wisconsin girl, true and true, right? Grew up in Wisconsin, central Wisconsin, small town, dairyland, right? And gosh, growing up, everyone said, "Oh, you got to be a veterinarian, Amber. You're awesome with animals. You like working with animals. You did 4-H and FFA. You got to be a veterinarian." And so I said, "Okay, cool, right? I'm on it." So I went to UW River Falls and started looking around at classes and took this behavior class, a psychology department. And sometimes animal science students, they're kind of like, oh, those gen ed classes, I don't care about those, right? But this psychology class was all about animal behavior. And I thought, wow, that's what I want to do, right? That's what I want to learn about. I'm not even going to apply to vet school. I was in my junior year, undergrad, told my parents. They're like, "What? You're not even going to apply?" And I was like, "I just don't want to do that anymore." I job shadowed some vets and I said, "I want to do animal behavior." So I looked around and I got into the zoology, or, they call it animal biology now, program at Oklahoma State. And gosh, I was working with lizards, right? Green and no lizards. And I had no lizard experience, right? Coming from Wisconsin. I knew nothing about them.
They don't have lizards up there.
Yeah, right? No, no. It was a little too cold, right? So, I would make mistakes all the time about, holding them in the wrong place, their tails fall off. Yeah. Side note, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
No one told me.
Oh no.
Thought I ruined my master's project right there.
Oh.
But, so
Thankfully
anyways,
with cows. Yeah.
yeah, right? Never had that happen to a cow.
Yep.
So
Yep.
I so I just, got learned a lot of really good, animal behavior skills and research skills, but decided that when it came down to it, dairy is where I wanted to be. And so I ended up Texas A&M University and never looked back as far as sticking with the dairy industry. And there's a little stint in University of Minnesota for my postdoc, looking at automated calf feeders across the Midwest. So that was a lot of fun. And then ultimately went to Washington State University, where I am currently, and just really having a fun time looking at dairy cattle behavior and well-being on Washington farms in the Pacific Northwest, but but also working and engaging a lot with dairy employees. And so that's kind of a unique approach. And I don't know, I've got some pretty unique projects, so I'm not sure where you want to go next, but we got some crazy stuff going on that we're working on at WSU. So I got it, but I do have to put a shout out. Go Cougs! So
Okay.
they,
Yeah.
yeah.
When your goal is to help animals reach their full potential, health matters. Diamond V offers a fresh perspective on animal health, a perspective that supports gut health, strengthens immunity, and ultimately enhances performance. For those who choose to invest in keeping healthy animals healthy, feeding Diamond V makes a statement about another dimension of profit, where margins are measured by confidence in your future. To get a fresh perspective, visit diamondv.com, because animal health deserves a healthier approach.
So what do you have going on right now? What's your favorite? Well, okay, you shouldn't pick a favorite project, just like you shouldn't pick a favorite kid.
Right, right, you can't do that.
But what do you have going on right now?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so there's a variety, right? One of my favorites is talking about like pest bird management, right? And
Mhm.
that's something that I don't care where you live in the US or maybe even globally, birds can be a problem, right? Um, and the thing is I didn't realize it was a problem. I'm not sure if you knew that was a problem, Gail, but gosh, I didn't know it was a problem until a dairy farmer told me. He said, I'm losing $200,000 a year, Amber, from birds
Oh, wow. From eating feed or from
eating feed. Yeah, and there's other things that we haven't been able to really measure yet. Um, we know from our research we're actually looking at about $55 per cow per day in losses.
wow.
And on some farms, right, you get more than 10,000 birds on some farms a day, and it's hard, right? That's tough to compete with. So, um, but I didn't know that was a problem until someone said so, right? So I think when we work in extension and
Mhm.
we're asking farmers what keeps you up at night, right?
Yep.
I never thought it would be birds,
Birds.
right? Yeah.
Oh, man. Yeah, it's actually kinda interesting. I've had in the past couple weeks, I've had a couple conversations with people about pest birds, and what strikes me is that everybody tries something different. We had when I was doing my PhD, the dairy we were on had a bird issue, and they used a bird cannon. I
Hmm.
think it scared me more than it scared the birds, to be honest with you.
I bet.
But yeah, places that struggle with birds, like, really struggle. I think everybody probably has a bird problem to some extent, but then you hear stories about these dairies where there's just, like, bird crap piled all over everything, and what can they do? They can't get rid of them, so and it is, interestingly enough, a topic that's come up a couple times recently, and I think what struck me is that everybody has, like, their little trick that works, or maybe it doesn't work, but, like, "Hey, you can try," so, I think somebody mentioned, um, putting out, like, rubber snakes,
Oh
uh,
yeah. Yep.
and I heard that one recently, and, um, I've heard, like, outside of, car dealerships, they've got the guys in the
Oh,
wind, like,
yep.
the
Yep.
so I've heard that before. A lot of weird things, but there's not a whole lot of evidence-based practices in this area, right? So,
Right.
unless I'm wrong, unless there's something I'm missing, but so what are your recommendations then as you're working with these producers?
Right. So we have looked at some of them, right? So um we also have a little bit of public pressure too on maybe not using some, if there's things that are maybe a little more
Mhm,
environmentally friendly or socially acceptable, we're looking at those types
mhm.
of things. One of my favorites, so we'll get into a story a little bit about American kestrels. So the American kestrels, right, in the United States, beautiful little birds, vicious little raptors. I love
Oh,
these
no.
guys. I don't know if you've ever seen one. They are gorgeous. You need to look them up now, Google it.
Okay,
Yeah,
yep.
these guys are just cute as a bug, but can be vicious. Not towards humans, obviously, right? But towards other birds. And so the American kestrel populations in some parts of the U.S. are becoming a little depleted, right? And part of that is not having good natural habitat, especially for nest sites. And so we were working with a wildlife biologist and up there in Canada, and we said, okay, so American kestrel populations declining. European starlings tend to be one of our, worst, you know, birds that we have to deal with on the farm as far as, eating our feed and spoiling it. So gosh, is there any way we can make a connection between the two? And so actually, we got a hold of this fella. He's in that Central Washington. He actually makes. He's over 80 years old, but he's been making American kestrel nest boxes by hand
Oh.
for, gosh, years, 30 years maybe. And so we bought a bunch of nest boxes and we've been putting them up on farms. and trying to help educate dairy farmers on, how to place them, how to maintain them, how to help attract American kestrels to their farm. And we've had some success so far. So
Hmm.
I've got my fingers crossed that that'll help. So what we're seeing are the American kestrel population, right, moving onto farms. They have a nice nesting site, and they protect those nesting sites. So
Mm.
we've seen European starlings try to move into those nest sites, and oh no, those American kestrels don't take that, right? They kick them out. They like that is their nest site. And so they are raptors, so they do scare off, starlings and some of the other birds. So essentially, we're helping the kestrels, but also helping the farmer by eliminating some of the pest birds on their farm. So
That is
I
so interesting.
yeah, I think it's one of I really love that story, right? Because it's a great win-win,
Yeah. That's such and I did take your advice. I did Google them while you were talking. They are gorgeous.
They are.
And for those listening, fun fact, they're North America's littlest falcon. So they are about the size of a mourning dove, and they are beautiful. What a unique approach. And how did you stumble on this? Is this something you were thinking about the bird problem first, or were you thinking about the falcon problem first, or the kestrel problem first?
Right. No, I didn't even know about the American kestrel problem, right?
Mhm.
I was totally focused on helping dairy farmers with their bird problem and what can we do differently, right? So, gosh, it was about 90% of our dairy farmers. We did a survey in Washington State, and about 90% use shooting, right? And I think
Yeah.
that's pretty common across the U.S. But some of the problems they're running into is they were saying, well, I'm using shooting, it's maybe not super expensive. It's a little bit time consuming, not bad, but it's not very efficient.
Mhm.
So, you can only shoot so many, and it just doesn't. There's lots of birds. I mean, if you're
Yeah.
a farm that has some of the farms that have those 10,000 birds per day, you know, uh,
There's only so much
what do you
shooting you can
do?
do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So looking for other options, right? They're definitely interested in looking at other options. I knew about professional falconers, right,
Mhm.
as an option, and some farmers had success with that. However, okay, I'm full of stories, Gail.
I'm here for
Chit
it. Yep,
chatty.
yep,
Yeah.
yep.
We've got some, our friends in the vineyards, right, that we have in Washington. We learned a little bit from their experience. So one guy that has a winery there, he said, okay, I had a professional falconer come, and things were going great, right? The
Mm,
falcon would fly, scare all the starlings and the birds away, and it was working really, really well until, and this ties into behavior, right?
mhm.
The birds recognized the falconer's truck, and they associated,
Oh!
right? So when his truck would pull up, they would scatter, and then when he left, they would come back.
Oh, that is so interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It was a really effective method until the birds got too smart. And that's one thing that we learned, right? So if there's a takeaway message on the pest bird management that we've been learning, is that you have to keep things unpredictable. Because once
Mhm.
the birds can start to predict things, the same goes with like lasers or
Mm,
alarm calls or anything like that. Once they learn and can predict when that alarm's going to go off or when that laser is going to shoot by, and it's not gonna hurt them, it's no longer
mm.
effective. So, but yeah, so that was kind of we did have lasers installed at the WSU dairy in the
Okay.
freestyle barns, and we're shooting them across and trying to keep birds out that way. And I think there's some hope there. I think that could be successful, but once again, it's got to be random because those birds are smart.
Yeah. Usually you think of a bird brain as somebody who is not very smart, but apparently that might be a misnomer there.
Yeah, right? No kidding. I mean,
Yeah.
I was astonished at how quickly these birds learn.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think I love, both of those stories because I think that's a really good example of what happens when you think outside of our area of interest, right? When you start
Yep,
exploring and making connections outside of your silo, can come up with some pretty innovative solutions to some of these challenges.
you bet.
So, super interesting.
And I love that it was totally that project has been totally started with a producer's idea and need, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's when we get really excited in our world, right? Is when we're
Yeah,
doing something that has been identified as a problem
right.
and we can try to help. So,
Yeah. That's what I love about my position in extension, and I think you do too, is that we get to have those connections with the producers, and it's cool when you see the land grant university working the way it was designed to,
yep,
where you can see what the needs of the industry are and then turn around and address them right away and see some pretty immediate responses.
that's one of my favorites. But
Yeah. I wanna take a step back and talk a little bit about, employee training. I know we were talking a little bit before we started recording, about students and new students, who come onto a farm and don't have necessarily a lot of experience. And that's something people like you and I think about on a fairly regular basis because we're working with undergrads a lot. But even on commercial farms, not everybody that you're going to find looking for positions necessarily going to come with a lot of experience. Um, so when you're talking about employee training or student training and dairy behavior, what are some of the best practices that you've seen when it comes to teaching some of animal handling? How do you recommend going about that?
gosh, my first piece of advice, right? And this might sound silly to some people, but bear with me, right? Um, is that anything that seems like it should be common sense is
Is
not
probably not.
common
Yep.
sense. Yep. Yep. I'll give an example. Right now, we're conducting a research study on, the health status of an animal, of a cow, right? And how her health status may affect her handling ease. So we're actually looking at heart rate for both the handler and the cow,
Mm,
as well as their behavior. So, I mean, I know I grew up on a dairy farm. I know my experience with sick cows and how to handle them. But for a student or a brand new employee on the farm that has no experience, that's a little bit scary because they're not
mhm.
used to that. They don't know what they have to do differently, right? And so, even though it seems like common sense, right, to us,
Right.
uh, the new employees and the students, it just isn't. And so that's one thing that we've noticed, and that hopefully we'll be able to actually have scientific evidence to show that, even though it's
Mhm.
something that we feel and we know. But hopefully we can use that then to take back to the farm and help some of those new employees and students understand, how they could do a better job, how to handle those animals that are a little bit at risk of, being aggressive or acting
Right.
out. So
Yeah.
that was something. Communication. So that's a big one, right? I'll give you an example. Oh, well, I hope you're ready for another story.
As always, yes, bring them.
So I just this is just a great example. We talk a lot about like hierarchies on farms, right? And some farms are very complex as far as you've got the owner and you've got multiple levels of managers, right? And then you have employees that work under those managers. And so we've talked about, communication and how if you're one of those employees that is essentially doing the work, boots on the ground type work, and you see a problem. So we'll talk
Mhm.
about safety, for example, right? If you see a problem, you have to, as a manager, right, and as the owner, you need to ensure that the environment is such that that person feels comfortable speaking up, right?
Mhm.
And that's something that we've noticed a lot is that there's a lot of people just don't want to speak up.
Mhm.
I don't want to say anything. I don't want to cause any problems, or I don't want to. When
Right.
really they might have a really good idea. And so it's all about creating that culture and that environment and to help make sure that all employees feel like they can say something if they want to or if they need to. Um, and sometimes that means having a means for them to speak up anonymously, right?
Mhm.
So I'll give an example. We were doing a slips, trips, and falls training, right?
Mhm.
And we had this map up on the wall and had all the different areas of the farm. Okay, so the milk barn or the parlor and the maternity pen, and we said, okay, we gave everyone some stickers. Right, sounds silly, but bear with me, okay? And there's about 30 to 40 employees in the room, no managers or owners present, and we said, okay, The red sticker represents somewhere on the farm where you've witnessed a slip, trip, or fall accident. Okay. And then a yellow is where there's risk of an accident happening and so forth. And so we gave them all these stickers. Okay. And we said, all right, come on up, put them on our map. Okay. So we're waiting. Everybody's filing up. They're putting their stickers on and going back to their seat. And then one gentleman asked for a pen. And I said, a pen? Okay, I don't know. What do you need a pen for? But okay, sure. Here's a pen, right? And he goes up there and he draws a rectangle on the map in the corner. And I'm like, okay. And then, there was some conversation. They're speaking Spanish and I'm still learning. So I couldn't pick up everything. And all of a sudden everyone's taking their red stickers and throwing it on the map in this rectangle. And I was like, well, there's a story here. I know there's a story here. I don't know what it is yet. And so everyone sat down and I said, okay, guys, what is this rectangle? What is going on? And they said, well, that's our parking lot. And I said,
Oh.
your parking lot? I said, everyone's getting hurt in the parking lot? And they said, yeah, it's uneven. The ground's uneven. It's not
Mm.
paved. And so people trip and fall. The lighting's really bad. We need better lighting so that we can see better. People are backing into people with their cars and stuff. Like
Oh.
it's a dangerous parking lot. We need more lighting.
Hmm.
And I was like, lighting. That's all you want is more
Right.
lighting in the parking lot, right? So we leave the farm and we drop the map off and we're telling the dairy owner, okay, here's the parking lot, and they said, the parking lot? Why? What's wrong with my parking lot?
It's
I
got some
said,
problems.
yeah, I said, man, people are getting hurt. You need to put some more lighting in there.
Yeah.
So he's like, that's all they want. They want more lighting in the parking lot. And I said, yeah. So he put more lighting in the parking lot. People were in a safer environment. They felt heard,
Mm.
but it took a way for them to share that, in an anonymous way that they felt like I can say something without getting into trouble.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, but it was a simple fix, just more lighting in the parking lot.
Yeah. I think I heard 2 lessons in that story.
Yep.
The first one I think I heard was that just because you say it's a safe space doesn't necessarily mean it is,
Yep.
right? So it's very easy for somebody who manages people to say like, "Yeah, come to me. I'm an open book. Come feel free to let me know about anything." But just because you say it doesn't make it true. You have to actually remove barriers to communication for your people.
Yep.
Um, and then the other lesson that I heard in there is that like sometimes you just got to ask people what they want and they'll tell you.
Yep.
Guessing what's going to make them tick isn't always going to be a useful tactic.
100%. Yeah. Spot on. So,
Yeah.
but that's once again another fun thing where you can kind of look at and say, "Oh wow, that was something I didn't expect to have such a big impact, but it did."
Right.
Just a map and stickers, right?
Yeah. That's such a useful tool. Yeah. So I'm looking at some of the other topics that you listed, and one of them, speaking of lameness, right, and speaking
Yep,
of
yep.
injuries, is using technology for the early detection of digital dermatitis. So it to me, it's kind of interesting because that sticks out a little bit from some of the other stuff you've been working on. So where did that come from? What have you been working on in that area?
I've always been interested, obviously from behavior and well-being standpoint. There's always been this idea of how can we detect disease earlier, right? And ultimately improve the well-being of that animal quicker, and have a better prognosis. And so with that in mind, I guess I kind of thought back to, okay, what are the tools? Farmers are investing in all these tools on farm, activity monitoring devices. How can we help farmers get the best bang for their buck, right? That essentially that's what it boiled down to. How do we get the best bang for a buck? So, you know, we said, okay, well, we have some activity monitoring devices on our campus, so we're using those tools. And then recently, oh, Gail, we had an awesome opportunity. So we actually had a Fulbright scholar from Romania come over, and he worked in
Oh.
my lab for a couple months. And he also had a lot of experience, with behavior and animal well-being. He worked somewhat dairy cattle, but he also worked a lot with water buffalo, which
Mm.
that's a whole nother,
Yeah.
You think we have some ornery dairy cows? Oh my
I
gosh.
yeah.
You should look at those water buffalo.
Oh.
Um, but anyway, so he came over and he was also interested in, early detection of disease. And so I had a master's student a couple summers ago that her job, poor girl, right? Poor girl. Every single day, every morning, she would go out morning milking all through the summer, and she would look at every cow's rear feet to try to identify, any signs of digital dermatitis forming, anywhere from a swollen foot, redness, anything like that, to an actual lesion. And then she also used thermography, right? So she would take thermal images of those back feet as well. And so the hard thing now, the hard thing is, you go out there every single morning because we don't know which cows are going to develop DD, right? So essentially, she had to monitor all cows
Mm,
all summer, and then you're just waiting because we weren't going to impose, cows with digital dermatitis. So we were just waiting.
right.
So all summer she was waiting for cows to essentially develop. But the cool thing is that since she had records every single day from every single cow, she could go back, retroactively and say, okay, the cow was diagnosed on this day with an apparent lesion. Now I can go back in my records, both with thermal imaging
Mm,
and behavior data, and actually, say, okay, are there any signs? Is there anything that we could have noticed or seen that would have led us to recognize this cow is developing DD? Which I think is awesome, right?
yeah.
So working with our collaborator from Romania, and then he also pulled in another collaborator that does a lot of machine learning. Oh yeah, so
Mm,
machine learning is not that is way above my head, right?
mm-hmm,
I don't understand a lot of that, um, but she's from Israel and she focuses on, essentially taking large data sets, which we had from my master's student, and then applying models and trying to figure out, are there, you know, can we detect DD early, right?
mm-hmm,
And so we recently just published a paper, I guess last year, on using activity monitoring devices and behavior to detect, the onset of DD, in which we had pretty good success, which is
mm,
super exciting.
yeah.
But the next thing we're working on then is the thermal imaging, right?
Okay.
Thermography. So could we detect it, earlier using thermography? So fingers crossed, right? That hopefully we can figure that out. But ultimately, like I said, helping farmers use these technologies that can really help them manage the cows, detect disease sooner, and just have a win-win for the cows and the farmers. But
Nice.
yeah, so I think it's, we had already had some previous studies published looking at um, time, just looking at the time budgets of cows and
Mm-hmm,
how if they develop DD, digital dermatitis,
mm-hmm,
how that affects their behavior. And we know that, gosh, some things like eating, right? You lose
right.
almost like an hour, I think it is, of eating time per
Wow.
day, which is significant, right? And
Yeah.
what do we want our cows to do? We want them to eat and rest,
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But if they're eating, 60 minutes less per day, like that's pretty significant. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, anything we can do to try to, help those animals have a good quality and productive life is what we're trying to do.
Well, we're coming up on the time when I usually like to transition to the three questions we ask all of our guests. But before we do, what's one more good story that you can share with us?
Ooh, one
Your
more.
favorite. I'll let
My
you pick a
favorite.
favorite.
Oh my gosh. Because I have so many stories, right? So it's hard. So I think one of my favorite stories is, but before we started recording this, Gail, you and I were talking a little bit about, the students and
Hmm.
student development. And I think when you look through, I've been at WCU for almost 10 years now. And I think about one student that came through that where the light bulb went off for me, right? Where it was a kid from New York City
Hmm.
and didn't have any, I mean, like was very much a city kid, didn't have any animal experience, farm animal experience, wanted to be a veterinarian, came out to WSU, and joined our cooperative university dairy students group, right?
Mhm.
Our CUDS group. Once again, right? So he's starting from really no experience whatsoever
Yeah.
to essentially we're trying to train him how to manage a small herd of cows, right? Everything from milking and breeding and so forth. So I remember this kid, he was a funny guy because we talk about that common sense again, right? So I remember one of the first days, I was talking to him. I was like, okay, what I need you to do is I need you to go get, cow, 2412. I need you to bring her up. And then what we're going to do is we're going to drench her and we're going to, that was rambling off all these things we needed to do to help her, right? And he was just staring at me. And I'm thinking, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
what's going on, right?
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I said, what's wrong? And he goes, uh, how do I know which cow that is?
Mm,
And I said, oh, okay, sorry, let me take a step back, right? I said, so each cow has an ear tag, which has a number on it. You're looking for cow number, 2412. It'll be written on her ear tag. Does that help?
mm.
But it really took me aback, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
That was one of like the simplest things I ever thought. So flash forward, that kid stays in the CUDS program 2 years, as a VP for the group, um, comes down to it and he decides, I I think, instead of being a small animal vet, I think I want to work with dairy cows like the rest of my
Yay!
life. Yeah.
Yay!
And I said, wow,
I love that. Yeah.
right? Yeah, because he totally, he was so smart and just, I mean, he could sit down and he could have a conversation with you and I right now and just talk about dairy cows and, the dairy industry. And he
Yeah.
learned so much. And I guess it's opportunities like that where, we talk about research and the impact we can have when we talk
Yeah.
about extension and teaching. Gosh, anytime that you can have those little wins, you take them, right?
Yeah. That is the best feeling when you convert somebody over to the dairy industry.
Yeah, and I love sharing the dairy. Anyone that'll listen to me, right?
Yep.
I love sharing the dairy story with them. So that was a big win.
That was a great story to end on. Yes.
Thank you.
Anything that we forgot to talk about? Anything else you want to add before we transition to our three questions we ask all of our guests?
No, I mean, I think if anybody that's listening really wants to talk lizard sometimes, let me know.
Lizards or kestrels? Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
It's time for our famous three. Maximize profitability and herd health with early detection in animal health, reproduction, calving, and feeding. The most advanced bolus technology and professional support from agricultural experts makes this possible. SMAX Tech, the health system that future-proofs your operation.
So the first question we ask all of our guests is, what is your favorite dairy-related book or resource?
Honestly, it's kind of a textbook, and I hope that's okay. I'm a little
That's
bit
fine.
of a nerd. I literally have this book sitting right in front of me right now. It's the Dairy Cattle Science, fourth edition.
Nice.
I just can't help myself because even though I grew up on a dairy, my grandma and grandpa made the decision to sell the dairy cattle
Mm,
when I was still quite young. And so
mhm.
right when I was, being promoted from pooper scooper to, actually getting involved in more of the
Right.
fun stuff, the animals were sold. And so a lot of that dairy management stuff, even though I was exposed to it young, I didn't really
Mm,
get to learn it in depth, right? Because the animals were gone. And so the Dairy Cattle Science fourth edition has always been my go-to as I was trying to learn more about the parts of the dairy industry I didn't get to be involved in as a kid. So
yeah.
it's got a
Yeah.
special place in my heart.
Yeah. We love nerds around here. It's fine. So our second question is, what is your favorite non-dairy related book or resource?
I love my dairy books.
Yeah.
Okay, once again, this is super nerdy, but okay. When I moved to Florida, I didn't realize that we moved into an area that's like a bird sanctuary area, Right. And so this means I get these random birds that show up in my backyard, and I've
Ah,
become a little bit of a bird watcher. And
all right.
so so I'm constantly looking up different, birds and what they are. And I even have a bird book over here in the corner that I like to pull out sometimes.
Oh,
So I think I'm starting to become a bird watcher. That wasn't intentional, but I guess the Kestrels prepared me for that.
happens to the best of us.
Right?
It's a slow decline.
Yeah, right. No, seriously, I'll be sitting at my desk and all of a sudden at home, and all of a sudden I'll see this random bird come into the backyard, and I'm like, "Ooh, what's that?" And completely lose focus, right?
Yep, yep. It sounds very peaceful, though.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, and our last question that all of our guests get asked is, what sets successful dairy professionals apart from those who are not successful?
Being open to change.
Mm,
Yeah.
mhm.
So I think that because it's tough, right? I mean, uh, our instinct for most people is to try to not prevent change, but maybe we're not open to it. We don't maybe like change. um, but our dairy industry, as we know, and there's many people that know better than I do, has changed significantly over the years.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
think it's only going to continue to change. So being open to change and trying different things is going to be, you know, really important,
yeah.
for professionals in the industry.
I think that is a good answer. Yeah.
Right? I was thinking about it, reflecting. I'm like, yeah, that's a good answer.
That's great advice.
And
Yeah.
having a good sense of humor. I think you got to
Yes.
have that.
Yes. Well, if people want to find out more about what you're working on, where should they go?
Oh, right. So the WSU Animal Sciences website, I have a faculty page there. We actually, I hope you don't mind, but we have a little project we're working on
Oh, yeah.
that hopefully we'll have a link up there soon. We're gonna go live real soon. It's actually we're starting with swine first and then hoping
Okay.
to expand, but it's a youth website looking at safe
Ah.
animal handling, and it's interactive. I'm so excited. It's
Oh,
more like a
cool.
game, right? So like they
Yeah.
choose a pig and then they learn about pig behavior, and like I said, I think cattle will be the next species we tackle. So
Nice.
keep an eye out for that because I
Very
think
cool.
it's a fun way to help kids, whether they're on farms or not, learn about animal behavior.
Very cool. Yeah, we'll be sure to check that out.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today, Amber. It was great to catch up and hear some of the cool stuff that you're working on and hear some pretty great stories. So I could see that sense of humor. So
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And thank you for allowing me the opportunity to share some of those stories.